Hello everyone. My name's Karina Urquhart. I'm the Executive Director at BIC and your host for this session. It's great to see so many of you tuning in for this event. We had quite a lot of you sign up, and actually from several countries as well, which is always fantastic to see. We'll be tweeting about this event using the hashtag on your screen there. So please do feel free to join in online. This event, as you can see and as you know, is exploring the subject of Brexit and the supply chain for the book industry. So before we get started then, just some housekeeping for you. Questions will be invited during the panel discussion session, which will be about half an hour or so into the event. Use the question box. You should have a question box on your sort of toolkit, if you like. Just enter the question in there. If you want to ask a particular speaker, just say which speaker. Otherwise, just leave it as an open question and we'll work our way through them. The event's been recorded today for BIC to use in its marketing and to allow those people that weren't able to attend this session today to be able to enjoy the event later on. It will be shared on our YouTube channel, but please be assured that unless you're invited to speak, you won't be identified in any way in the recording. So join the conversation online. As I've said, we're tweeting about it using the BIC Brunch hashtag. And finally, it goes without saying that this session should remain a politics-free zone. So thank you for cooperating with that. So before we get started then, what is a BIC Brunch? Some of you I know are very familiar with this part of the session. Some of you have been to, I think, nearly every BIC Brunch or BIC Breakfast we've ever done. So there are a series of short online sessions. They vary, usually around about an hour, hour and a half, and they're all focused on supply chain topics of interest with expert industry speakers sharing their knowledge and experiences, and they're all recorded and shared to our YouTube platform. More information about our brunch series, including our green brunch series, can be found on our website, and you can see the link there to our YouTube channel. Don't worry about the links if you're trying to scribble them down. We'll obviously share the record. You'll see them again on the recording, and we'll also be sharing the slides to our website later on. So as for the agenda for the session, it's on your screens now. You can see we will start off with 3 presentations. So the first one will be from Sue Kelly, who's Operations Director at Publiship, and she'll be giving an overview of what Brexit means for the book industry. Christopher Sainer from Editor will be looking at the data elements and how to communicate the required information. And finally, we will have a session from Ivan O'Brien, who is the Managing Director at the O'Brien Press, and he will be talking about Brexit from the perspective of a small Irish publisher. We'll then go into a Q&A session. So we'll be joined for this session. We'll also be joined by Lisa Faratro, who's the Director of Environment and Sustainability at the CPI Group. Paul Gibbon, Executive Director at United Independent Distributors, Simon Pallant, Digital and Data Services Manager at Gardner's Books Limited, and also Nigel Wyman, Sales and Marketing Director at Gardner's Books Limited. And then we'll have a short wrap up and we'll end the session at 3:30. So who is BIC? What do we do? Some of you will already know. In fact, I think a lot of you will already know, but for those that don't, we're a UK-based, not-for-profit members organisation sitting at the heart of the book industry. We create standards, best practices, and resources that form part of the DNA of your supply chains. We help your organisations become more efficient, save money, save time, become less wasteful, and hopefully, ultimately, greener as well. We sit at the cornerstone of the book industry, and we hold a unique position of trust, facilitating UK and international collaboration to reach agreement on dependable standards, best practices in the supply chain. We do this in a variety of ways, including running 4 strategic committees. So we look at, we have a committee each for physical supply chain, digital supply chain, metadata, and the library sector. And we also are about to launch our brand new Green Supply Chain Committee as well, as part of our Green Promise. We offer training, events, workshops. We execute supply chain related projects for and on behalf of the book industry and our membership. And we operate 3 industry recognised accreditation schemes. So you can find out more about everything we do on the website there. So back to the purpose of our session. As we enter into the second quarter of 2021, I thought it would be a really good idea to have a look and monitor how the industry has been coping with the transition to Brexit, and how it's been coping with the new Brexit regulations. This session then has been set up to offer hints and tips and practical advice from our speakers who have first-hand industry experience in this area. So today we'll be looking at common challenges, and the areas covered in the session will include origin information, shipping challenges, port procedures, common pitfalls, how to avoid them, selling into Ireland and the international market, and many more topics I'm sure will come. We're also going to be finding out how ONIX 3 can be used to assist with effective communications of some of the requirements, some of the data elements that are needed for the new regulations. And one last thing I should mention, that today our speakers have very kindly volunteered their time to be with us today to give the benefit of their first-hand experience. However, please be aware that any information that they provide or anything that's provided by BIC shouldn't be regarded as legal advice and is for general discussion and informational purposes only. All information provided during this session is provided in good faith, and neither we at BIC nor our speakers make any representation or warranty of any kind, expressed or implied, regarding the accuracy, adequacy, validity, availability or completeness of any information. I just have to say that just to make sure that we're, everybody on the call today is clear about the context of this session. So enough from me. There's a lot to cover today, so I'm going to hand over now to Sue Kelly. Sue is the Operations Director at Publiship, and she's going to give an overview of the current situation from the perspective of a shipper or freight forwarder. She'll be giving a brief history of Brexit and the differences between where we are now and where we were, and quite a bit on imports and exports, and some information about Ireland. So I will hand over to you now, Sue.
Thank you, Karina.
Oh, sorry, bear with me. There we go.
Okay, so Brexit is such a big question. It's such a big question for every business in the UK that's trading. And we are all in a situation where, regardless of whether or not we're even trading with Europe, there is implications in a department within our business. Brexit has become problematic for lots and lots of us because of the way that it's happened. The UK joined the EU in 1973. There was lots and lots and lots of discussion at the time as to whether we would be better to be in or whether we should be out. But we joined and we embraced lots and lots of the policies, and we went with a lot of the policies. And in many ways, it was very good. But there has been rumbles about the bigness of the EU, and ultimately it led to the referendum where we all voted to leave in 2016. If we look at the timeline, I haven't listed all the little changes like the euro because lots and lots of changes happened over a very long time, over 40 years. We voted to leave in 2016. We left 4 years later. We agreed 7 days before we left what we were going to do with the EU. We changed the border operating model in a way that changed the way that we did imports. We already did imports and exports over the road borders. We would import something from Turkey, for example, that was cleared on the border. It export cleared in Turkey and it import cleared into the UK. So why did it become more problematic to now bring in something from Ireland just because we had a border? And the border operating model was designed to improve things and to make things happen more quickly and easily, to streamline the process, because all of a sudden we were suddenly dealing with thousands more transactions on the border. It's continually under review. The border operating model is being updated regularly. There are things in there that are designed to help us all get through. One of the biggest ones is phased import procedures, and they're there to try and help people who have got issues around dealing with suddenly having to pay duty payments or pay VAT payments. The UK was part of the EU for 48 years. It's not a simple matter to just disassemble it in 4 or in about a week, as we got left with at the end of last month. Next slide, please, Karina. Why are we still talking about Brexit? It happened at the end of last month, at the end of last year. So surely it's all okay now. Everybody should know what they're doing. It should be very straightforward and very easy. Unfortunately, because it takes so long to unravel, it means that we don't all know what we're doing. I've been on thousands of webinars, it feels like, with lots of industry experts. The information is contradictory. And you just, when you think something's clicked and you've got the hang of it, something throws a spanner in the works that nobody's thought of, and we have to sit and try and work out how to fix it. There's lots of information out there. Some of it doesn't always make sense, and I think the purpose of us all getting together today is to try and help each other work through with our own experiences of how we've met problems and we've managed to deal with them. Small businesses in particular, the Federation of Small Businesses has put together some statistics that are on the screen now, and it's quite disheartening to think that small businesses have given up because of the way that things have become so problematic. Others are considering setting up a warehouse or a presence or a distributor that's going to work on their behalf for them in Europe, which greatly simplifies things because it takes away the UK-EU border. But with over 70% of traders reporting shipment delays, it is important that we try and work on what we've done together, what worked, how we made things work more easily, and how people haven't had problems and delays and lost revenue. Next slide, please, Karina. Oh, have you gone one? Could you go back again? Oh. Go forward again. And again. Okay. The border operating model is one of the things that the government introduced last year, and they published it last year. One of the reasons why a lot of companies are struggling to deal with the changes is all of a sudden we have become, or the EU has become, the rest of the world. So there are tariffs, there are import checks to be done everywhere, and export checks. So each transaction with the EU has an import entry and an export entry. There are two sides to every border. The border operating model is a massive document, and then it was reprinted as another 360-odd page document. And so much of it doesn't apply to book shippers. You really don't need to know most of it. So to read through everything and extract the bits that you do need to know is quite well, it's very time consuming and quite complicated. So when we went through the border operating model, there's lots of it that the book shippers are fine. You don't need to worry about it. When you import and export now within Europe, there is VAT payable on import. This was never there before. So suddenly importers from Europe have to find an amount of VAT to pay. So what the government did was introduce a system of phased approaches to try and help people manage their cash flow. So this meant you could do simplified procedures, or you could do entry and declarants records. So that meant that you could just keep good records of your imports and exports without actually clearing anything, and then you could present them at a later date. This meant that you didn't have to pay your import taxes at the time, and it gave you time to work out what you were going to do with them. Now, books don't have a lot of taxes, and most publishers have been importing from the rest of the world for years. So we never really saw the point in anybody doing that. Why set up a load of new systems? Why have to go through quite a rigorous screening program to be approved for the simplified procedures, when really you're used to doing customs entries? So we didn't recommend to any of our clients that they actually needed to engage in a lot of these difficult and more complicated changes in administration. So you just need the full entry. Book products, and only if you're doing lots of books plus items or toy items do you not need to start working with trying to make things more complicated, changing your procedures and your record keeping. Step 2 was introduced, and it didn't relate to the book industry at all, and that's to do with regulations around fresh fruit and vegetables and foodstuffs. So again, there was a lovely big chunk of the border operating model that you don't need to worry about. And then step 3 was that we'd tighten up all of these procedures and we'd all have to do everything by the book. Now that was due to be started on the 1st of July, but it's now been put back to the 1st of January 2022. So these systems are they're designed to make the import stages easier. So they should help you bring everything through, reduce tax liabilities, and make things more straightforward. For the publishers, we don't think you need it. You didn't need it. You don't need it. And we've recommended to most people just do a full entry when it comes in. Can you change, please, Karina? So what should you be thinking about? There's lots and lots of things that you do need to know. It is a really big question, but there's certain things that you can do to make things easy. The deferred entries, the entry and declarants records, is there a benefit for my organisation to be doing this? If you are bringing in taxable items, there is a potential that it could be worth your while. But there's new facilities being introduced, so you can do things like postpone VAT accounting. So this means that you don't need to pay your VAT on import. You're able to do it within your general tax return. So this is where you need to, we generally tend to find that the production staff and finance teams need to start working together to work out how they're going to deal with their import VAT. While there's postponed VAT accounting, most of our products, apart from toys, wouldn't attract duty. And duty from the EU is suspended as long as you can prove that it was manufactured within the EU, which is part of the deal. However, you then need to consider things like if it came away, if your product was produced in China and you brought it into the UK and then you want to send it into the EU, how have you classified that product? So is it all just a book, or is it a book and a toy, and you're going to enter 2 separate items? Because the toy part will be dutiable when you move it into the EU. Safety and security on import isn't required until January 22, but you really need to know who is who. Who is the exporter of record? Often we see distributors raising the invoices on behalf of publishers. The publisher is the exporter, as the distributor doesn't employ and have the books. So they're the people that should be on the customs entry. The safety and security is to do with, if you've heard of ENS, it's all to do with knowing who the players are in the transaction. It's around financial security, it's around terrorist security, it's making sure that everybody knows who is who within the supply chain. Incoterms, really important. These Incoterms classify who says who is what. So you need to know who is going to pay for what part and who is responsible for what part of the job, who's going to do the customs clearance, who's going to pay the import taxes. So this is another really important part of what you need to do. URI numbers. URI numbers are a really important part of trading with the EU. It's your economic operators registration identifying number. It's not the same as a VAT number. This number is really critical to you being able to trade. You can trade with an EU URI number. It doesn't mean that you have to have an EU VAT number, but you have to, if you've got a UK one, you need, even if you're using an indirect or a direct representative in Europe, you still need to have an EU URI number. There is lots and lots of confusion around URI numbers, VAT registrations, URI registrations, company registrations, and that everybody's circumstances are really very different. Commodity codes, again, very important part of the transaction. They tell you whether or not you've got to have duty or VAT applied to your product. They're all online now, but it's not the easiest. It's not the easiest thing to read through, but all your freight forwarders would be able to help you go through those. But again, they need to be on the documents. We need to make sure that we've agreed what they are. Okay, next slide, please, Karina. What should I be thinking about exports? There is no phased approach for exports. In the EU, in the UK, we're quite lucky that we don't see VAT applied to most printed products. In Europe, it is applied to printed matter in almost all areas and in all different rates. So one of the problems that we've found in these first few stages is imports have gone swimmingly because the UK has been very relaxed about implementing lots of the rules. In Europe, it's not. So VAT needs to be applied. Lots of your importers and your clients haven't understood that they were going to have to pay this when the goods arrived. So the goods are arriving in their EU country and they will not be delivered or customs cleared until the VAT's paid or settled in some way. So we're seeing lots and lots of delays, understanding, bad feeling. Incoterms. Again, do you know what you've included when you've sold? Have you included the cost of clearance? Cost of an import clearance in the EU is anything between £50 and £100. Have you included it when you've told your client what the quote is? Are they going to get a bill that they're not going to be happy about? If you know what you've agreed to in the first instance, it just makes things run much more smoothly. URI numbers. Again, I've mentioned it on import, it's just as important on export. If your client is not registered as an importer or an exporter, the goods can't move, that they will. And to find out at the last minute is always a bit of a panic. Commodity codes, again, commodity codes very specific to each individual product can determine the rate of import VAT and duty. The HS, the commodity codes, I have a whole section of training on commodity codes, but basically the first 6 numbers are an internationally agreed code. It's made up of chapters, so books are 49, and then there will be 4901, and then it's 99, and that is the international HS code. So everybody agrees with that. And then after that, for imports, for exports, there's another 2 characters, and then for imports, there's another 4 characters. So those 4 characters will then be different and individual to every country. So it's the HS code, which is really important to what you put on the documents. But if your client, if your haulier is going to do the import clearance, they really need to know what the actual import clearance commodity code is. So you would ideally put the full 10 digits for the country that you're going to on the documentation. Documentation, what do I need to show? Lots of hauliers now are asking for all of the above details to be actually put on the pro forma or on the invoice, on the shipping invoice. We don't have pro forma invoices anymore either. So they want the URI number shown on the invoice. They want the INCO of both parties, the seller and the importer. They want the INCO terms on the invoices, so there's no confusion about who's going to pay for what. They need to know the names of places. They want the commodity codes. They want values. They want currencies. There is lots of information that needs to be on those documents. It's a good idea to set up a template to remind you what you need to do and what you have to have on them for all of your EU exports. The biggest thing is the communication. Your clients may never have bought their product from outside the EU before. They may not understand or realise the implications of now importing from the UK. They may not understand why you're asking them to pay VAT or why their product is stuck in a customs warehouse and they need to get them out. Some hauliers might not have wanted to do the import clearance, so they're stuck and they're being told they need to arrange the import clearance and not really understand what it is. So much of this is as we're talking here now, it's to do with communication and to making sure that we're all helping each other through this process and making sure people are aware of what they need to do in advance. Next slide, please, Karina. What about Ireland? I was going to talk to you more about Ireland. Ireland is very different. Nearly all the deliveries from the UK have been significantly delayed. The UK suppliers have suddenly got customs costs that they didn't have to deal with before, whereas an EU supplier doesn't. Peel ports, who do a lot of the freight into Ireland, have reported that more and more goods are just avoiding the UK completely. So they'll go straight from the continent into Ireland, and that trade is up significantly. Northern Ireland has a different status again within the EU, but guidance is quite unreliable and it's changes regularly. You can sign up to get updates from the government, and there is regularly updates on the Northern Ireland. And again, you need a different URI number again. It's an XI URI number to deal with Northern Ireland and to be able to do the import and export clearances. You need to consider your currencies. Postage issues. In general as well with the EU, there is a significant decrease in small packets. So individuals who are sending small, usually business to customer, because of the problems with returns and all of the issues around that, there's lots of companies that have just stopped sending out small packets until there is clearer guidance and less delays. Rights issues. The UK and Ireland have traditionally been seen as a single rights territory for buying in from the US in particular. Okay. So as I've mentioned, I don't believe there is an expert at the moment who can tell you exactly what to do with all of this and cover every scenario. But by sharing our experiences, the idea is that we can hopefully take each other through it, and we'll all get through a lot better by sharing and helping each other along. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much for that, Sue. I'm sorry about the slide. We can talk about that later. I think that was
That's all right.
My end. Yeah, so interesting. It's the scale of it, isn't it? I think you've really brought home there. It's an undoing of a 48-year-long relationship, trading relationship, and the fact that there is contradictory information doesn't help. And I think the main thing, one of the key things, you said a lot of key things, but for me, one of the key things there is the communication. It's just how important it is to communicate.
Yeah.
And also to understand that it's not just the UK that is on a learning curve, it's the countries in the EU as well. It's new for them too, which is something that I think is worth remembering. So yeah, so thank you very much for that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Chris Sainer. Chris is the technical editor at Editor, and is going to talk to us today about ONIX. Well, is going to talk to us today about the data. So how do you provide all this information, or a lot of the information that Sue has been talking about? And how can ONIX 3 be used to help assist with that? So I'm going to hand over to Chris. So Chris, I'm going to give you the screen, if you just bear with me. Okay. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Karina, and thank you, Sue. So Sue mentioned two very important things: commodity codes and country of origin. And I'm going to just briefly talk to you about how you can communicate that information in your ONIX 3 field. So let's start with commodity codes. So commodity codes have always been part of international trade. If you've been importing and exporting from outside the European Union in the past, somewhere in your supply chain, someone will have been using commodity codes. But with the end of the transition period, and also last year, Nielsen started proactively asking publishers to include commodity codes in their ONIX feeds. I think more people have become aware of commodity codes and the complexities of international trade. So as Sue was saying, commodity codes are very important. They are used in the administration of tariffs, duties, VAT, quotas, and also for international trade statistics on all physical goods that are traded internationally. Again, so these commodity codes are based on a global system managed by the World Customs Organization. It's called the Harmonized System. We usually call those the HS codes. As Sue said, these are 6 digits. The Harmonized System is made up of 99 chapters, about 1,200 headings, and about 5,000 subheadings. So the majority of normal books are in chapter 49, and a standard book would usually be 49,0199, for example. But there are variations. Each country or trading bloc have their own codes. So for the United Kingdom, HMRC manages the codes for imports and exports. These are based on the HS codes. So the first 6 digits, always the HS codes. And then if you're exporting from the UK, there's an 8-digit code. If you're importing into the UK, there's a 10-digit code. European Union Customs Union, you'll need a Tariff code. Again, 10 digits for importing into the European Union Customs Union. For the United States, for example, has its own system. Again, there are 2 of these: harmonized tariff schedules for importing into the US, Schedule B codes for exporting from the US. First 6 digits are the HS codes plus 4 digits that are different depending on if you're importing or exporting. So this is a bit of ONIX, and this is the code for an ordinary book. So it's sent in ONIX 3 in composite. It's called product classification. There's a code list 9, where you can say what type of code it is. So in this case, it's the Harmonized System code 01, and then this is the HS code for a normal book. This is a composite that can be repeated. So in your ONIX 3 file, you can send all the different codes for all your markets. So in your ONIX record for a single product, you can include your HS code, your HMRC 8 and 10 digits, your Tariff codes, your American codes, and codes for other important markets as well. Not all books use the same codes. So for example, you cannot rely on just simply doing a mapping from product form in ONIX to to a commodity code. Dictionaries and encyclopedias use a different subheading. So 490191, normal books are 99. So this is the coding you would need to send a dictionary from exporting from the UK and importing it into the USA. So as you see, the third one, HTSC, harmonized tariff for the United States. More complex products, where you get into especially books with some other form of product. In an ONIX record, there's an option to send a percentage. So you can say which percentage, how much of the product is made up of a book, how much is made up of the toy. So in this particular example, again, children's picture books. Picture books have a separate code. They're in a separate heading, under a separate heading. So they've got a separate HS code. 60% of this product is the picture book, and then we have a separate commodity code for the toy, and 40% of that is the toy. To calculate these percentages, this should be the same percentages that you use to declare mixed VAT rates. So if you're declaring the VAT is 0% for the UK and 20% for the toy. Now, these codes, it's important to include commodity codes in your ONIX file. It's important to tell your trading partners to communicate this information. Putting them in your ONIX 3 file, you can communicate with your trading partners internationally. It gives them an idea of how much they're going to pay, what kind of VAT that product might be liable to in their market. It's also, the more we make these codes available, the more they are communicated, the better it is for the supply chain. It becomes easier to add those to the necessary documentation. As Sue said, your shippers, your international shippers, are very experienced in these fields, and it's quite a good idea to check with them if you're not sure which classification code to use. The other bit of information that's very important, has become more important, is the notion of country of origin. This is where the product is made. It's the country of final manufacture. So a good rule of thumb is it's the last country where the product was substantially transformed or significant value was added. Another indication is if you have to associate a new harmonized system, an HS code to the product, then that is where your product was manufactured. Country of origin rules are complex. They're not as complex in the book industry as they are for cheeses, for example. This information is vital. You have to include it in your metadata as well. It's used to calculate, again, things like tariffs, quotas, or certain countries have very specific rules about if the product is manufactured in their country, there are different sets of rules. So for example, if your book is printed and bound in Italy, in your ONIX, you would include a country of manufacture tag and send IT as the commodity, as the country code. Country of manufacture is not the same thing as country of publication, another ONIX tag. Country of publication is usually to do with where you make a legal declaration, maybe legal deposit, declare copyright. Nor is country of manufacture necessarily the same as where the manufacturer has their office. It's where the product is manufactured. If you have a more complex product, as you saw in the example just now, the children's picture book with a toy, the country of manufacture can be repeated in an element in ONIX 3 that's known as product part. So you can identify for each part of the product where it was manufactured. More complex situations, so for example, you have a book that's printed on demand by a publisher, then the print on demand service has different plants in different countries. You will only know where it's going to be made when the customer places the order and the order is sent out. So in that case, country of manufacture cannot be included in your ONIX feed. That'll have to be included in transaction information. If you do something like you have the first impression printed in Italy, but a subsequent impression comes from Indonesia. The only way you can do that is you'll have to do an update to an ONIX, and you need to do a carefully timed update to your ONIX. Editor publishes various documentation. We do what we call application notes that look at specific aspects of ONIX, and we've done one specifically about these questions. It's the one Commodity Codes and International Trade in ONIX. So it expands on what I presented in this in these few slides. And if you want to download that documentation, you'll find it on our website. I've also put a short URL that you can copy here. These slides will be made available after the webinar anyway, so you'll be able to copy it then. Thank you. And I hand back to Karina.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so the importance of commodity codes is not to be underestimated, and particularly as it gives advance notice of potential costs, etc., and the complexity of the printing on demand as well. I'm going to ask you a few questions about that later on, I'm afraid. So I'm going to hand over now to Ivan. So Ivan O'Brien is Managing Director of the O'Brien Press, and is going to be talking to us today about his experiences of Brexit from the perspective of an independent publisher in Ireland. Ivan will be sharing his findings with regards to preparation, data, logistics, both inbound and outbound, and finally a look at the costs associated. So over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Karina. Yeah, so you've heard the theoretical basis and the challenges as seen from the outside. So we thought it would be a good idea just to see what a practitioner, a publisher, has actually met, the problems and challenges that we have faced, and how we've dealt with them. So the first thing, preparation. I spent a lot of Q4 2020 getting numbers together. Firstly, the EORI numbers. The discovery that I needed both an Irish and a UK number was a bit of a surprise at the end of the day, but we managed to get those. Country of origin. Now, as Chris said, for books, this is usually the country of printing, though not always. We have a pretty good database and pretty good records going back a long time, but I don't have digital records for absolutely everything we've ever produced, and we have the odd copy lying around of quite a few things. So after using our databases to pull most of the information together, I did still have to spend a couple of hours looking through old physical editions down in an archive room to be sure that I had the country of origin correct for a lot of the stragglers. The tariff codes, we're lucky that there are only a couple for books, which Chris went into. Nearly everything is the 490199, but in our case, we don't do dictionaries, but we do children's picture books, and they are 490300. I just use a single 10-digit one and no one's given out yet, but I can see now the need that maybe I probably need to put half a dozen versions of that code in for all the individual products. I had it all in place by November, before Nielsen actually asked for the tariff codes, thankfully, but it did take a good deal of work. So if you haven't done it yet, be prepared to sink a little bit of time in. Thankfully, it's a one-off. Secondly, very briefly, what do you do with all these numbers? Well, most of the data is at a title level, other than the EORI, which is at a company level. It's all title information. So you need a decent database for storing all of this stuff and making sure that you maintain it for new titles, etc. We use Stuyvesant, which I will heartily recommend to anybody anytime. There are plenty of other sellers on the market. Don't manually input the codes. If you've got hundreds of thousands, you're going to be making lots of silly data entry errors. So get your spreadsheet expert, if you're not a spreadsheet expert yourself, to pull it all together, import it into a database with as little manual keying as possible. And to say something that was implicit in what Chris said, but I will make it explicit, use ONIX. If you aren't using ONIX at the moment, you know, move heaven and earth to get to the point that you do use it, because it ensures that you can get your title information out without having to rekey, without having to fill in separate forms for different people, etc. It will transform the way that you work. And use ONIX 3, obviously. Talk about logistics. From a publisher's perspective, inward logistics mainly relates to printing. As you've heard already from Chris and Sue, books have no VAT and no duty and are not perishable, so they are in principle the simplest possible thing to move between the EU and the UK. But it was never going to be simple. We actually deliberately planned and scheduled no deliveries at all from the UK to Ireland in January. But even at that, there are still delays right the way through to the middle of April, where we are now. Unpredictable, unreliable. You lose a day or a week here and there in an unpredictable way. Sue also mentioned people avoiding UK transit to Ireland. That's us. So we are prioritizing continental printers who have a ship that goes straight from Sweden or Spain or France to Ireland and cuts out what we call the land bridge completely, because the land bridge adds cost, complexity, and time. We're also favouring non-UK printers for that reason also. Rule of thumb at the moment, we're adding another week for luck for all deliveries, and that'll be the case until at least September. We're hoping that the autumn won't get impacted, obviously, to that same extent. In terms of cost, different printers are handling it differently. Some printers are absorbing the cost, or are not mentioning to us yet anyway, because it's all still bedding in. Some printers are adding a single fixed cost per delivery of about £50. So we'll see how that evolves over time, but the cost is going to have to be borne by somebody at the end of the day. That's going to be the customer, which is us, and that's going to impact on selection of printer. Outbound, for us, that is sending books to wholesalers, retailers, freight forwarders for further export, and to direct customers. And across the board, quite simply, it's extra cost and extra hassle. So Amazon, even slower and messier than before. It can be like 3 or 4 weeks from leaving the warehouse to actually appearing on the shelves there, which is driving us towards using their economically unviable POD, but at least it keeps availability up. Parcel post, we used to be able to just put an address label on it and put it in the post. Now it's full customs declarations. They're slow, they're unwieldy, they're expensive, and manual. And we're hopeful, but not optimistic, that that is going to change. Northern Ireland is easy for now, but as Sue said, the rules on the north are changing all the time, which is disconcerting, because things can change very, very slowly and then all at once. And we saw a lot of that in the first couple of weeks in January with food availability, among other things. So who knows what's coming down the track. So in summary, the costs of Brexit: administrative headaches, pointless form filling, currency uncertainty, though one of the bright points is that sterling has been pretty stable for the last 3 months, which was not something we could rely on. Direct costs aren't that high, but new small costs are appearing. And overall, there's just a weariness, largely due to the continued willful misrepresentation from the UK politicians and press. And apologies for that bit of politics, Karina, because I know you said this was politics free, but from the outside, it's bewildering how it's all being treated there. In summary, it's stable for now. There will be more changes, and we just all have to keep our eyes and ears wide open. And that is me.
Thank you, Ivan. So what's coming through loud and clear for me is the importance of ONIX, but especially ONIX 3, and the fact that you're having delays still, this far in. Well, I guess it's not that far in when we're thinking about undoing a 48-year relationship. So yeah, lots of food for thought there. And the fact that I'm going to ask you I will save it for the panel discussion session, but I would like to talk to you about what you think the unpredictability is predominantly being caused by, but don't have to answer that yet. As long as it's a non-political answer. Okay, so thank you very much. You happy to share the slides later on?
Oh, absolutely, of course, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, great. So so I'm going to take my screen back, and we will be skipping ahead to the panel discussions. So let's just get the names up. So we have, so joining us now, we have the following people. In addition to the speakers we've just had, we have Lisa Faratro, Director of Environment and Sustainability at CPI Group. Paul Gibbon, Executive Director, United Independent Distributors, Simon Pallant, Digital and Data Services Manager at Gardner's Books, and Nigel Wyman, Sales and Marketing Director at Gardner's Books as well. So it's over to our audience now. So if you want to ask questions of our panelists, please do. You should put your question into the question box that's on your little toolkit that you should have. So while you're all thinking about questions to ask, I'm going to start off. So I'm going to start the question of, I'm going to start big. So I'm interested to know from your different organizations, from all of you actually, for what for your organization would you say was the biggest challenge? Who wants to start?
Well, I can start from, I suppose, a slightly different angle from a wholesaler's perspective into Europe and into Ireland. Hi, Nigel Wyman here, Gardners. I suppose the biggest challenge for us shipping export into Europe, and something that everyone's already said here, you know, we've been shipping to countries outside of Europe for many years. So why is this such a big problem? I think for us, it was fundamentally the customer receiving the items and us getting the data, the commercial invoices absolutely bang on to make sure that the brokerage teams in the relevant countries added the correct duties and tax that were there. And what we found with various couriers, and this is across the board, is that many of the brokerage teams in those countries weren't ready or able to actually put accurate charges onto the commercial invoices coming into those relevant countries, whether that was Ireland or the Netherlands or France or any European country. So the biggest challenges for us was actually trying to communicate with the customer to say, look, you know, we're trying to work with you and get the correct charges in there. But what the team here has already mentioned on a couple of occasions is that the customer themselves just weren't aware of the charges they were suddenly going to be hit by, and also the transparency of those charges as well, understanding what part they were actually paying on. Ireland being a typical one where actually more challenges than most, because there is no VAT on books, but suddenly there might be a pen there that has a VATable item to it, and suddenly they get a big charge on the whole invoice instead of just a VATable item on the invoice. And there was a lot of toing and froing. So I think for us, that the challenge was actually trying to work with each individual brokerage team in the relevant European countries to try and simplify that for our customers. Because once we had the data right, and again, what's been mentioned here many times is EORI numbers, XI numbers, HS codes, everything like that. I mean, my biggest thing is overstate everything, don't understate it. You know, have too much information. You can't have too much information because then you can't get it wrong. But just going back to the question, the biggest challenge actually is that brokerage part, making sure that the transparency was there for the charges.
Thanks, Nigel. Paul?
Yeah, I think very similar to Nigel on that front. I think it seems a long time ago now, but the added complications for ourselves was, you know, we're a group that's been recently made up of a number of companies working on different systems, and also with many different logistics service providers. So once we actually believed we understood what was required when we were looking at the Brexit requirements, it was the understanding how that how that then led into our individual organisations. And the challenge really is interpretation, and that was our individual team's interpretation of what was required, but also the conflicting interpretations from all the logistic service providers we were using. And I don't blame anybody about this process. Everybody struggled, and it was a matter of trying to understand and interpret on your own needs what you thought the requirements were. Yeah, as it happens, we're there now. I'm comfortable that we've got processes in place, but again, this continues. We'll all have to keep watching what's happening, and I'm looking for continuous improvements within our processes for the efficiencies and to ensure that the paperwork is accurate and conforms to anything that's required in the future.
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing conversation, isn't it?
Certainly is.
Yeah. Lisa, we haven't heard from you yet. So what would you say have been or still is perhaps biggest challenge for CPI?
I think it was just the learning curve for everybody, and we're still on a learning curve. It's understanding the relationship to the end customer, because often as a manufacturer, we're neither the importer or the exporter, we're just the manufacturer, and it's how to get product that was so simple before delivered now is just much more complex and adds quite a lot of delay into the process with the number of days that are needed prior for all of the information to be uploaded. And it is just how much everybody's had to learn quite quickly, and it is just that changing picture that we're seeing all the time around requirements, different requirements into different countries, even though all into the EU. So it's just that, and trying to explain that to your end publisher has been definitely the challenge, I think, that we're facing.
Yeah, definitely. That's the scale of it, isn't it? It's just it's touching everything, all aspects. Sue, from the freight forwarders, anything to add? Well, of all the things you discussed already, what would you say the biggest challenge was?
It is a lot to do with things changing, trying to keep on top of the huge amount of data and information that is there to try and work out what's relevant. You can sign up to the government website and they will send you a daily Brexit update. But it covers everything. So it covers living in Australia, living in Spain, or it covers, there's so much stuff out there to try and get through it all and extract the bits that actually mean something to you. It's just so time consuming. And then you'll leave it for a few days before you even open it, and then there was suddenly something really important. You think, oh God, need to sit and spend some time going through that. But it is getting better. People are getting to understand things better. But it's trying to deal with things that the delays are difficult to deal with, because people are used to a certain kind of service from us where we can answer very quickly, and we can't, and it's sort of disappointing when you can't give the answers that they want in the response times that we usually would do, because there's actually some hauliers that have stopped just taking bookings because there wasn't enough. Right. It was just too complicated and far.
Wow.
And actually, it's the bigger hauliers that have struggled rather than the smaller ones, because they've suddenly had this massive amount of cargo to deal with a customs administration that was never there before. So yeah, it has been challenging. Is it getting easier? I'm not sure. Some days it feels like it is, and then other days it doesn't.
But the books are still arriving.
Yeah, they just take a bit longer. It should take, say, I don't know, 3 or 4 days to deliver to Germany, and it doesn't. It could take up to 2 weeks.
Right. Okay.
And it's a lot to do with the bureaucracy that is part of that.
I also think at the beginning of the year as well, it wasn't helped with the obviously border closure in France.
Sure.
Probably added to the Brexit complexities that were coming our way. So that was a challenge that really hurt us all, I guess, at the beginning, on top of all the bureaucracy of the Brexit scenario as well.
Yeah, exactly. Just to confound things. Chris, I guess from your perspective, well, I don't want to answer for you, but
well, as an international standards body,
yes,
I guess the biggest thing we found was making sure that we communicated the information about what you can already do in ONIX and how standards are there to help in situations like this. To reinforce something that both Ivan and Nigel brought up, use of standards. There's nothing, the standards allow you to send maximum amount of information. Share all that information in a good structured way, like in ONIX. Using good structured data allows more automation in the process, will help things. So, and also, as Ivan pointed out, you know, once you've done that work, luckily most of the codes that you will need for book products are the same, so you can get those added quite simply to ONIX. From our point of view, editor, and I wouldn't say that we were faced with any major challenges.
No, but I think you had some increased inquiries, didn't you? I think from
yes,
on certain topics, commodity codes being one.
Yep. But we're always happy to answer those inquiries. That's why we brought out the documentation to emphasise that. But yeah.
Yep. Great. Thank you. And
also,
Ivan. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say that. So we have an ONIX list for all the customs codes that we've been asked for, but it's an organic list. So if we need to add new ones, it's very simple to request a new code in that list to say we need the new code for the Mercosur countries, for example, that kind of thing.
I think one of the things to mention on commodity codes is each individual company in the supply chain is responsible for their own local entry. And we have seen circumstances where a printer in China will do the export entry with one HS code because that's what they're licensed for. In the UK, we would have it qualified under and imported under a different HS code. And in America, you may actually find that with the Trump tariffs, they've classified it as something completely different. And that's a circumstance where, although the HS code is supposed to be an international standard, it's the local responsibility. So if you're a UK exporter, it's up to you to make sure you agree with your country's rules. And if you're the US importer or a Spanish importer, it's their responsibility. So even if you're exporting to Spain, it is still and doing the import entry, it is still their responsibility to tell you what the commodity code is. So although you think you know, and previously a BTI ruling covered Europe, but now I'm not too sure whether it is actually legally enforceable in Europe. So it is important to remember that although you think you might know what it is, it's something that's worth checking.
It's not the code itself that changes. It's, for example, children's picture books, which is the great one for the one that changes a lot, whether this is actually a children's picture book or a general book, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the interpretation of the description that changes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that's yes, interpretation. That's another consideration, isn't it, as well? So I think Sue, I think it was you, Sue, you touched on that earlier on in your presentation about interpretation. Yeah, something to bear in mind. Ivan, what was your biggest challenge, if you can narrow it down to one?
Well, at a personal level, just management time in the middle of a pandemic. I needed all this nonsense like I needed a hole in the head. From a company perspective, unreliable logistics. The plus side of that was I was told by my customers that they weren't able to source any books from the UK until about mid-February, which left a bit of an open pitch, albeit with closed shops for our product in our own market. But that's a small positive.
Yeah. And Simon, anything to add to what Nigel has mentioned in terms of biggest challenge?
I mean, Nigel obviously mentioned stated the challenges that the business has had throughout this. For for me, from a technical perspective, this has been a sort of a project that's been going on for some years anyway, as an exporter to other parts of the world. I guess the challenges for us, certainly through last year, were just making sure that we had sufficient granularity and depth of data across our entire range for to meet Europe's needs, but also that that data was actually accurate. And so a lot of time was spent looking at in detail individual products from individual sources in order to just validate that the country of manufacture, country of origin that was stated was in fact the country of origin and not, for example, the country of publication. Because as experience tells us now, we do have customs officials opening boxes in various countries, not just in Europe, but around the world. And they will challenge you and will pick you up on discrepancies that are there.
Yeah, I think the country of origin has been quite complicated because quite often publishers will do a first edition in Europe and then print the bulk in Asia. So actually getting that into their systems and who knows which book, which edition is the one that's going out for export. I think that is quite challenging for the distribution centres and the publishers to manage.
It is, and the obviously the proliferation of use of print-on-demand facilities globally makes stating an accurate country of origin for that specific product at that specific time more of an issue in today's supply chain.
We have a question, well, I've got quite a few questions actually from our audience, so I'm just going to call them out as they appear. So first one is, oh, that's interesting. Something that we've struggled with is gratis copies, whether it's several copies for an author or a single review copy. We're never quite sure what to expect regarding import VAT or clearance charges. How should the accompanying paperwork be handled in comparison to an invoice where someone has purchased a book or books? So it's a gratis copy.
There isn't anything classed as free in customs, but if it's under £135, there's no need for a customs declaration if the value of the consignment is under £35.
And is that's the retail value, not the...
No, it's the transaction. Anything in customs is to do with the transaction. So if it was to consumer, it would be the retail value. If it was to a bookshop, it would be the bookshop's what they're paying for it.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. The next question I have is EORI number. Do both the importer and the exporter need both EORI numbers, i.e. Slovenian and UK?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a nice, easy one.
Yeah.
And B2C sales from websites. Do individual books which could be sent as letters, for example, so I'm assuming the person asking the question means letter in the post as a letter, do they require customs declaration or only parcels above a certain weight?
My understanding and my understanding of what we have been doing is putting customs declaration on all of them. It's a pain in the neck, but we've been told by the Postal Service that that's what we have to do, and we sent a few early in the year without that and had problems with delivery to the UK.
Oh, right.
And if you're talking about UK into Europe, obviously you've got the CN22 labels, which is the customs declaration labels that go outside of postal. Again, if it's under €22 or £22, whatever that is, it's not relevant. But that all changes again in July when you've got the one-stop shop VAT number coming into play. So if I was anybody sending stuff into Europe at the moment, I would just do the CN22 label customs declaration and you're cleared. And if it's under €22, there's no charges on anyway.
Okay, thank you. Sue, you were going to say something there, or has it already been covered?
Yeah, it's fine, it's covered.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. Right, so the next question is question for all. Which Brexit Oh, this is a good one. Which Brexit related issues do you see as improving while everyone gets used to the new processes, and which challenges do you think are here to stay and that we need to learn to live with?
Well, I'll kick off from my.
There's nothing improving. Is that what
Yeah,
that means?
well, the time scale slowly, because January, February there was significant delays into Europe, and we're talking in weeks in some places, and in some countries those are coming down to days. There is still delays. I don't think anyone can deny that. Someone mentioned into Ireland, it could be a day's delay to a week delay, but there's no real logical reason. And that actually goes back to my earlier point, that delay is usually caused by a brokerage issue around taxes and things like that when it gets stuck at the borders. There is some countries things are getting better into as they get more used to the new way of working. And when you're talking as Netherlands or Belgium as an example, you have something called an A23 documentation or an R4100, which are basically their VAT deferment accounts. So once they actually, the courier services knows they have these documentations, it's actually quite seamless because they tie the ORI number with that particular bit of information, and it gets to its destination without anyone having to worry about the VAT or duty. But this is very slow going. This is country by country because every country is different. They might be part of the EU, they might have certain regulations, but every country treats this in a slightly different way. Germany and Italy, as an example, there's still quite bad delays into those particular locations because there is problems. But improvements, they are slow, they are happening on the physical time it takes to get there. But as more and more countries get used to the new way of working, is slowly improving from our side.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Nigel said. I think in terms of delays, I think what we need to expect now is general lead times. There's a number of days added just to a standard lead time now, and I think that will continue just because of the processes that are required. I don't think it's ever going to drop back to where it was. I think further complications, and certainly into Italy, from what I've seen when I'm working with the service providers. Obviously, there's certain areas of Italy recently, due to COVID issues as well, and I don't want to keep harping back to COVID, but I think, when I'm looking at how we've been impacted, COVID's got a big part to play, and I really don't know, distinguishing between the two is quite difficult at times. But I like the way Ivan approached it earlier by saying, it's stable. I think we are now at a much more stable position than we have been. We don't know for how long. And the problem is each time we do have an issue, I don't want to underplay issues because a missed delivery or a delayed delivery, that's a big thing for an individual, and certainly I'm seeing much less noise now and many less issues, but you can't underplay what that issue means to the end customer.
Definitely.
Yeah. Definitely.
And it's an interesting point you make there, Paul, as well, about again, don't want to bang on about COVID. That has also not helped in everything that's gone on as well, and could have masked some of potentially, things could have been smoother. I'm not saying they would have been. No one has a crystal ball. We can't go back in time. But the pandemic has played its part in some of this as well. We can't forget it's not just about Brexit. It has been about all the other things surrounding it as well.
Yep. Yes. I have another question. So this is a sort of a scenario type question. So I'm a UK publisher and I'm printing in Italy, and I'm delivering to my German client. So I'm delivering straight to my client from the printer. How do I manage the physical movement? How do I manage the VAT and the financial transaction? And and then so the physical movement is EU to EU, but the financial transaction is EU, UK, UK, EU.
Good one.
That's a good one, isn't it?
It is. A difficult one for a wholesaler to answer because we don't manufacture anything, so unfortunately I can't help on that one.
Lisa, or should we come back to it? Should we have a think about that one and we'll come back to that question?
I'm not sure. So Let me think.
Yeah.
Because obviously we're only trading UK to EU over to Ireland.
Yeah.
So, which is obviously, we're not within the EU, so we're not actually selling over in, but I imagine it's the same as when we're selling over to Northern Ireland. So that they'll need the documentation in the way that you would for exporting out of the EU, and the selling documentation is as before, I would think. But this is part of the issue, I think, is that everybody, we think we know, and each individual transaction is quite complicated. If you take the name of who that's for, because we have some advice that we're getting externally,
yeah. Okay.
and we can see whether or not we can help with that.
Yeah, will do. Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot with that one. The next question then is, there were long delays. So this is about the delays really. So in January there were long delays at the ports and the Channel Tunnel. What is the current status of delays into the EU today?
I guess it's country by country, to be honest.
Yeah.
We take the EU as one, but like my earlier point, it's not. So I can tell you, Netherlands and Belgium and France is 3 to 4 days. I can get parcels into there relatively simply. Ireland, 1 day to a week. It really is country by country. There's no one answer to that question, because Poland is a couple of weeks. So it really depends on the country.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Are UK distributors and booksellers experiencing a reduction in orders from EU countries?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. Yeah, certainly from the perspective of my businesses, we're definitely seeing a significant decrease in the volume of books being dispatched into the EU countries. Ironically, the volume of books is dramatically decreased. The number of orders hasn't as decreased as much. So what's happening is the orders are much smaller. So again, not quite sure whether some of that is linked with COVID. I mean, our reduction started as soon as sort of the early months of last year, so sort of pre-Brexit, and then continued on. But definitely, it seems to me that it's we've got many parcels going out there, but the parcels are much smaller, which again then causes an increase in cost, because the cost per unit to transport out to EU is much more expensive than it has been in the past.
Yeah.
In the early part of the year, we definitely did see a reduction as people started to, putting it politely, bang their heads against a brick wall trying to get stuff into their countries. But that has settled, as my earlier point, and I think we're slowly getting back to reasonable volumes. It would be foolish for me to say it was as it was last year, but again, last year was a strange one because of COVID and nothing to do with Brexit. So it's a very difficult one if you do like for like 2020 into 2020 into 21 and 19 into 20. But we're back to where we thought we would be, but we're not jumping up and down just yet.
I think what could be interesting is looking forward and seeing how people try and get around this. So obviously, as an alternative to purchasing from the UK, options to localized printing, print on demand, or even with logistics service providers setting up hubs elsewhere, and almost distributing across wholesale, so distributing big volumes of books, then breaking them out at subsequently into the localized transport networks. That could all have a massive impact going forwards as people get around to look at that.
Okay. I have a question here about combined products. So in reference to when a book is a book or a toy, it was mentioned that if a product could be 60-40 for a book and a toy set, sorry, for a book with and a toy in a set, if the ratio is much smaller and you have a picture book and a small character toy, that's 90 to 10% ratio, would it be classed as a book, as the book is the essential feature, or would you still need a separate HS code for the small toy?
Okay, it's quite a complicated issue, and it will depend entirely on the product. It will also depend entirely on the customs officer that looks at your product. So your scenario is that if it's significant, if it's directly related to the book, then it's much more likely to be considered a book. If it's a character toy of it, and it's usually a children's book, and it's usually something there that's encouraging the child to read and follow the story, and as providing that it's very low value as well in comparison to everything else, then it will quite often just be classed as a book, and you don't need to list it separately. The only way to be sure is to actually get a BTI ruling done. Customs don't even, if you ring them up, they'll give you advice, but they won't underwrite that advice on their own telephone calls. The only way to be absolutely guaranteed sure is to get a BTI ruling done. But it's got to be direct. Basically, the product should be directly related and shouldn't be able to be used independently. I think we had a language book with a cassette, and they ruled that the cassette could be used, was basically so good it could be used on its own. So they started to change it, so the language course is then related to the book, so it said turn to page, whichever. And that was how the product came back to being just one whole book again. So
Right.
it is quite a complicated area, and you do need to consider each product on their own merit. Production teams will quite often just have a meeting, and they'll sit and we'll join in those meetings with people and advise based on our experience. And there's things to take into consideration, like where it would be retailed and those sorts of things. Is it going to be retailed in a bookstore, toy store? Things. There's things that would make it be weighted more as a whole book product.
It's also worth mentioning that you also need the country of origin for each of those elements as well. Yeah. Now, thankfully, as an industry, most of our products are books, but we do have large numbers of books with CDs or books with DVDs and books with associated products, mixed media packs. And it is important to have all of the information for each of those individual elements, and the values and the country of origins for each, so they can be conveyed down the chain ultimately to a customs official somewhere.
And the structure of ONIX 3 does allow you to repeat that information for the country of manufacture for each of those elements.
Yes. I have a question for Lisa. What, if anything, has been the impact on the supply of materials to printers in the UK that you're aware of?
So obviously it's the same thing for importing for materials. Most of our suppliers actually have either set up as UK entities, so actually they're doing all of the import declaration, and then the sale is between the printer and the UK setup company. Therefore, we're not experiencing too much of the import duty part. Some of them need to go into warehousing prior, so that can be quite complicated, where we have what printers call consignment stocks. So the supplier owns the stock that sits on your site. That's got a lot more complicated than it was previously, and we are seeing extensions of lead times as we are for product going outward bound. So we were very well set up, I think, in that part of the supply chain, just making sure that we have stocks sitting. Obviously, there was such an extension during the whole Brexit period that we were quite a long time thinking it was going to be January, February, July from memory, then December. So we had quite a lot of sort of stop and start. We're sitting with quite a lot of stock actually just prior to the final Brexit period. So we were, I think most printers were actually in a fairly good position with their supplies. We're now seeing the supply lead time start to settle back down.
Okay. Oh, that's good. It's good news. Something's improving. Okay, so and I have a question now about pricing in a non-commercial sense, in a non-commercial way, because BIC is a neutral organisation. So the question is around how to best calculate and anticipate the additional Brexit-related costs to be incorporated when setting the price of a book. So, for example, if a book is printed in the EU and imported into the UK, before Brexit, you'd pay the shipment, but what additional charges can you expect now? And also, when comparing the cost of printing in the UK, looking at, you know, have post-Brexit experiences shown that additional costs associated has an impact on where printing may or may not be taking place?
Maybe I'll take that one. I don't think it's very significant. You know, you're talking about 50 or 100 quid per book. So taken on its own, it's not going to make a huge impact on retail price. Obviously, taken across your accounts at the end of the year, those 50s or 100s do mount up, but they're not a killer on any given one. I think probably the more major factor there is any future unexpected currency fluctuations. To be honest, they'd have a much bigger impact were they to happen.
Right. Okay. Did anyone else want to say anything on that point? No. Okay. Then I have a question around, so we've been talking about the UK and the EU and the extra steps and the extra information and the extra documentation processes, etc., that need to be taken into account. Is this the same type of information for all countries around the world, or is this just specific to the Brexit scenario?
Well, it's from our side, we provide the same data, whether it's Europe or rest of the world. The commercial invoices we provide have the same HS codes, same commodity codes, all the relevant data. And we did that pre-Brexit for the rest of the world anyway. So in reality, apart from everyone unfortunately having to get used to this new way of working and its complexities, we haven't changed how we ship to the rest of the world.
We just had this lovely free trade thing that worked for decades and made us all forget that international trading has the potential to be complex for those of us who weren't going very far flung, and now we're back in that world again, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, and another question: are tariff, HC, tariff, and commodity codes fixed in perpetuity?
Yes and no. They are, insofar as the first 6 digits are pretty fixed, but the HS code system, tariff code system, all of those systems are subject to change, although realistically those changes tend to be in granularity or depth. So you wouldn't normally find the entire book chapter being moved somewhere else, but you may find that children's picture books will be further defined in future to break them down into further subcategories, possibly at a country level. Yeah, so generally they're expanded as opposed to heavily changed.
Yeah.
So
okay.
for practical purposes, we can treat them as unchanging for a period of a couple of years anyway.
Right. They need to be checked regularly or reviewed regularly, but hopefully one would like to think that books aren't all going to migrate en masse.
Great. Okay, I think we're coming to the point where we're going to be out of time. time has flown by. I just would like very quickly to ask all of you to think of, well, probably given the time, probably one area, one takeaway for the people watching and listening today, if you can indeed condense it down to the one. So this is going to be the summary and the wrap up, if you like, of the session. So who wants to go first?
Well, for me,
okay.
Lisa.
I was just how I think understanding everyone's been through this whole learning curve, I think for me has been amazing. And you feel that it's definitely the whole trade has really tried to pull together in trying to learn as quickly as possible in something that has been we've all learned on the fly, really. So I think that's my big takeaway.
Mine is just the data on the commercial invoice. You're absolutely right, Lisa. Everyone has been exceptionally understanding during a very difficult time, but making sure that CI, that commercial information, is there when shipping, especially exporting stuff out into Europe. Getting as much information that commercial invoice as possible is what I would say. HS codes, EORI numbers, XI numbers, anything you can, as long as it fits, get it on that commercial invoice.
And mine is more or less the same. Get your title data in order consistently across your whole list, put in the time, make sure it's done, and then the problem largely goes away.
Yeah, for me, it's just continue to keep an eye out for changes, continue to review your processes and requirements, and get the data right.
Simon?
For me, it's if you're not already using it, please do consider moving to ONIX 3 sooner rather than later. It does cater for this information very well for the entire supply chain.
I think that's what Chris was going to say.
Probably.
Yeah. I endorse that 100%. I also wanted to say that we've got we're in a great industry where there's a lot of good communication and a lot of standards. So I think we can be optimistic about the future for the book industry.
I'd agree.
Very much indeed. So that brings us to the end of our panel session. So I will just go back to the screen. So thank you to our panelists. So it just remains then for me, well, just a quick sum up. It's very clear that it's a time-consuming, lengthy process with a huge learning curve to reverse or undo 48 years, a 48-year long relationship. We've heard about the importance of data on invoices. We've heard about the importance of standards, that standards are there to help, the importance of ONIX 3, getting used to a new way of working. Remember, it's not just us in the UK who are getting used to a new way of working, it's the countries in the EU as well. It's new for them. The importance of documentation, and just, I think above all, the importance of the detail of the data, but also the importance of communicating, and just to make sure that all trading partners are all talking to each other at all times. So there's clarity on what each of those roles are, what they're responsible for, what they will be providing, what they'll be paying for, etc., etc. So the slides and the recording will be made available after this event. And I would like to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to our panelists for their time today, also to our speakers for their time putting their presentations together. I know that, you know, putting a presentation together isn't just about the presenting on the day, it's about the prep, and also to our panelists as well, because there was a lot of preparation work involved with them as well. So thank you for your time both today and in the run up to this session. I'd like to say thank you to our attendees for coming along today and for tuning in. You can stay in touch with us via our mailing list. You can go onto our website to find out more information about that. The link is on the screen there. You can also follow us online as well. I've just said we're going to make the presentation available later on. So we hope to see you at a future BIC event. Thank you again for attending, and see you very soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.